All About Anat, a new episode of a YouTube series that doesn't exist, entirely devoted to our favorite goddess of Ugaritic myth, Anat. Today's discussion is Anat a feminist? Before we begin discussion of Anat's characteristics, who she is, and her feminist nature, let's briefly cover the background of ancient Canaan. The term Canaanite is used to describe the Semitic people who occupied the eastern Mediterranean coast during the 3rd and 2nd millennium. Because of this label, the later region where Anat resides held this name of Canaanite due to its connection to the Hebrew Bible. However, Ugaritic is not Canaanite. The city of Ugarit in the ancient Canaan region, again collapsed into Canaanite by Coogan and Smith in the stories of ancient Canaan, was a city that ruled over a region with numerous towns in it during the Late Bronze Age. It is part of the polyglot independent city-states of ancient Canaan, as this region wasn't under one main empirical rule. Let's take a look at the map of ancient Canaan. The ancient Canaan region spans from roughly present-day Gaza to present-day Lebanon. More specifically, the goddess Anat is found in myths from the Ugaritic literature of Ugarit. This northern city-state was destroyed around 1200 BCE and was then rediscovered in 1928. The region of Ugarit, as aforementioned, is now called Ras Shamra after its destruction, and the ruins are now called Ras Shamra. During 1929, several excavations took place of Ugarit, allowing scholars to find numerous written works and clay tablets. This Canaanite city-state, Ugarit, had several excavations done in 1929, allowing scholars to find numerous clay tablets inscribed with the Semitic alphabetic cuneiform. Cuneiform are reed stylus pens impressed images on clay that create the writing system of the time. The ruins are now called Ras Shamra. About 1250 BCE, scribes of Ugarit invented the mentioned alphabetical writing system that was rendered into cuneiform later and translated over many different regions. The alphabetical language was fixed in the Late Bronze Age, approximately a time period between 1600 BCE to 1100 BCE, again, roughly. The system was used for administrative purposes, writing down Ugaritic cultic rituals, and writing down myths and legends. More in depth about the writing system of Ugarit themselves, the estimated original dates of the original myths is uncertain because scribes used the works to educate themselves. However, present copies that were translated by Coogan and Smith in the stories of ancient Canaan dated to around the Late Bronze Age. Scholars have been able to identify time periods for the works, including the Baal cycle and the story of Kat, which will be mentioned later by the scribe that wrote them. His name was Elimilku. His written myths were verified by the king Nigmadu, and there were like 4 of these guys. So this particular Nigmadu estimatedly reigned around the mid-14th or late 13th centuries BCE. That seems like enough background. So who is Anat? Anat is a maiden warrior goddess and goddess of the hunt in Ugaritic literature. She is often portrayed as a devoted sister to Baal, the storm god, and is often connected to Baal in his own exploits in tales like the Baal cycle, recorded approximately 1250 BCE. In the Baal cycle, Anat is characterized by her violent temperament and warrior prowess, and can be seen bathing in the blood of her male enemies. What an icon. In the translation by Coogan and Smith in the stories of ancient Canaan, starting on line 10, quote, "Heads rolled under her like balls, hands around her like locusts, warrior hands like swarms of grasshoppers. She fastened heads to her back, she tied hands to her belt, she harvested knee-deep in soldiers' blood, up to her thighs in warriors' gore." How vivid. This accurately describes how Anat is portrayed in many other myths throughout the Baal. In another excerpt from the myth, after Baal's battles with the same divine figures, Anat says, quote, "Didn't I demolish Ael's darling sea? Didn't I finish off the divine river, the mighty?" End quote, on lines 37 to 38. Here she is claiming defeat of the storm god's Baal's enemy and the credit for said enemies. In the introduction to the Baal cycle provided by Coogan and Smith, they argue that there is the possibility that Baal and Anat's characterizations are presented through their planes of battle. Baal is exhibited as on the cosmic level and in the heavens, while Anat is battling on earth. This offers a deeper understanding of Anat's connection as a devoted sister to Baal and exhibits her parallel throughout the myth. In terms of her sisterly devotion, Anat's defeat of death, characterized in the Baal cycle by the deity Mot, exhibits the revenge Anat placed against death for killing her brother. Her powerful nature as a warrior goddess and her power due to being Baal's sister is illustrated by the utter destruction of Mot, by extensive lacerations and destructions of death. Another aspect of Baal's death that highlights Anat's devotion is her patronage to the deity after her revenge has been committed. On line 15, quote, "She brought him to the heights of Zaphon, wept for him, and buried him. She put him into a great pit in the earth," end quote. The passage then goes on to explain how she kills 70 of many categories of animals as an oblation for Baal the Conqueror, on lines 20 and onward. These descriptions of the 70 categories of animals is just a little fun thing that Ili Milku likes to throw in there. However, these descriptions are not centrally based in the Baal cycle. Anat's devotion is widespread and found in many other myths. Anat's characterizations of her violent temperament aren't only just found in the myth of the Baal cycle. In the story of Akat, her revenge against Akat clearly exhibits her rage. In the myth, Akat is gifted a bow and arrows from the craftsman god Kothar Wahasis. Anat is envious of these gifts and bribes Akat numerous times, and even bribes him with the ultimate gift, immortality. And yes, he turns it down. Crazy, right? But further goes on to insult the goddess, saying, quote, "Bows are for warriors. Do women ever hunt?" Take a moment of silence for the audacity. Yes, he said this to the warrior goddess of the hunt. Anat is, obviously, and understandably so, insulted and smites him, saying, quote, "I'll make you fall under my feet, you pretty boy He-Man," end quote. She has a way with words, what can I say? You may recognize a similar instance of a mortal man insulting a goddess in many different mythological stories from different pantheons. Diana and Actaeon from the Roman pantheon, Inanna and Shuk-Hali-Tuda in Sumerian, and more specifically, the Akkadian Epic of Gilgamesh translation when Gilgamesh insults Ishtar, which we'll discuss later in more detail. But back to Anat. She makes good on her word and employs the bird Yatpan to destroy Akat. These images of the goddess show her violent nature and her need to show men of what's up. Sounds like a feminist to me. Going back to Anat's devotion as a sister, she's paralleled by the character Pugat and her revenge against Yatpan for killing her brother Akat. This also happens to exhibit similar female Ugaritic literature roles, including Anat, Pugat, and others. However, unlike Anat, Pugat is a devoted daughter and is often depicted as being, quote, "You who carry water, you who collect dew on your hair, and you who know the course of the stars." These industrious housemaid characteristics, as described in the introduction to the tale by Coogan and Smith, illustrates a not diversion from these typical womanly manners, which brings about the true question, is Anat a feminist? To answer this, we have to go back and look at the comparison between Inanna Ishtar and Anat. Both divine goddesses show varying levels of female divine depictions that often stray from the norms of female society. Anat obviously rejects feminine roles in this case and instead chooses to oblige in more masculine-dominated ideals, hunting and warfare, as this was a more male-dominated society. Though this is argued numerously in different scholarly works describing Anat's fertility goddess nature and her overall sexuality. In Walls's dissertation, Anat in Ugaritic myth, there is a mention of the scholar Johannes C. de Moor, how discussing Anat is a, quote, "naughty daughter of Ale," and the, another quote, "harlot of the world." This makes me very uncomfortable, so we're not going to be discussing her sexuality on this vein of thought. I'm sorry, Demore, we just don't make assumptions. Going back to Ishtar's comparison to Anat, Gilgamesh turns down Ishtar's sexual offer, which results in her rage and the great bull of heaven being sent to kill Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Anat, on the other hand, being a maiden goddess, seeks to take away Akat's masculinity, which is a symbol that has been offered by Coogan and Smith in their introduction and in Walls's dissertation. The bow is a symbol of Akat's masculinity in this sense, and his question about hunting being for men shows a prevalent aspect of Near Eastern society in an androcentric sense. Anat obviously rejects feminine roles in this case and instead chooses to oblige in more masculine-dominated ideals, hunting and warfare, as this was a more male-dominated society. Not that Inanna Ishtar doesn't have these characteristics, but she is still widely associated with her sexual nature, especially with the roles of kingship, which can be seen in Enmerkar and Gilgamesh and others. Similar to Ishtar sending an animal after Gilgamesh, Anat sends the bird Yatpan, as aforementioned, who was then murdered by Pugat. After Akat was murdered, Anat is successful at retrieving what she wanted to take away, Akat's masculinity. As women in the ancient Near East were constrained to being devoted wives, daughters, and mothers, this is a very interesting portrayal of womanhood. A woman taking away a man's quote-unquote masculinity seems like the type of ancient feminism we need. Is she hardcore? Yes. Is she still an icon? Also yes. Continuing with the comparison of Ishtar from the Akkadian myths and Anat in the Ugaritic literature, they both ask their father gods Anu and Eel, respectively, for their permission to destroy the insulting heroes. In the case of Ishtar, she says to Anu in the Epic of Gilgamesh, translated by Andrew George, she says, quote, "Father, give me, please, the bowl of heaven, so in his dwelling I may slay Gilgamesh." Ishtar then goes on to say that she'll break the gates of the netherworld if he doesn't allow her permission. This eventually works, obviously. Anat, on the other hand, doesn't really ask for permission, saying to Eel, the king of the gods, quote, "I'll smash your head, your gray hair will run with blood, your gray beard with gore, then you may call a cat, he can rescue you, to the son of Daniel, he can save you from the hand of the maiden Anat." This comparison creates a difference between the two female goddesses, instilling the fact that Anat's temperamental nature and her straying from the path of respecting older male figures exhibits a more feminist nature. Her lack of respect towards a man can be construed as the need for Anat to also get away from typical female constraints of society and be in charge for herself. There are some very feminist ideologies portrayed by the maiden goddess. Along those lines, Anat's independent female role threatens male control in society in a patriarchal structure, as said by Walls. You could say, Anat don't need no man. Though it should be noted that while these seem like compelling reasons to view Anat as a feminist, these are merely ideas because we truly don't know the reality of Anat's character due to the fragmentary tablets of the Ugaritic literature and the limited knowledge we have regarding Anat, but more on that later. More on the potential Anat feminist idea. Anat is a maiden goddess, meaning she is a virgin goddess. You may be familiar with many other maiden goddesses, specifically in the Greek pantheon. There's Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, and Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. It is important to note that these deities have identified their maidenhood in an eternal vow. Anat, on the other hand, has been questioned regarding her sexuality by many scholars. There is the idea, contrary to the Greek virginal goddess counterparts, that Anat is merely an adolescent figure, a goddess who just has not had sex yet or a husband, as proposed by Walls in his dissertation. Anat refuses to be only a wife and mother, and therefore fights against the repressive nature of patriarchal societies, as portrayed in other myths, including the wife Ninlil, Enlil's spouse, or a priestess Ninshubara, Inanna's attendant. While Inanna does have a strong feminine role that seems very feminist, because it contradicts the androcentric society. Anat refuses to accept men, other than taking their manhood away in the terms of Akat, extrapolates of violence and outrage towards male society. Metaphoric castration. Such a feminist delight. Though, of course, Anat is still an extremely ambiguous character with numerous amounts of contextual arguments from her pubescent, violent nature, and more. On that note, difficulties interpreting Anat's character and therefore her possible feminist nature has been a consistent issue among scholars. According to an article, The Disappearance of the Goddess Anat, by Theodore Lewis, the CTA and the KTU have argued over the presentation of Anat's characteristics due to the fragmentation and damaged nature of the cuneiform tablets. For further information, the CTA is an addition of Ugaritic alphabetic cuneiform tablets and transliteration, while the KTU is a compilation of all the alphabetic cuneiform tablets, again in transliteration. Similarly, there have been a multitude of discussions regarding the linguistics of Anat's name and its derivation from Nut. There is also a fun little discussion about whether or not she is a cannibal or just a very loving sister toward her brother Baal. In a quote presented in an article, the warrior goddess, quote, ate his flesh without a knife, she drank his blood without a cup. This image is often argued as being truly cannibalistic or opposingly a metaphor about her love for Baal. Though, since Anat has been argued as either a fertility goddess or a warrior and violent goddess, the arguments presented by scholars have created a questionable interpretation in regards to Anat. But of course, there are very clear expectations for women in a patriarchal society. but Anat's dissension exhibits some very feminist ideas. We love a violent queen, because at the end of the day, she slays.